Imagine the most trusted pain reliever in America, the one sitting in almost every household medicine cabinet, recommended by doctors for generations, suddenly becoming the target of a presidential announcement linking it to one of the most emotionally charged health topics of our time. That is exactly what happened on September 22nd, 2025. And within hours, the company behind that product looked straight at the most powerful office in the world and said, "You are wrong. This is not a story about Tylenol. This is a story about what happens when political power collides with science, when a sitting president makes a claim from the White House podium that a billion-dollar American company publicly refuses to accept, and when millions of families are caught in the middle, confused, frightened, and unsure who to believe." Let's break it down carefully. On a Monday afternoon in late September 2025, President Donald Trump held a press conference in the Roosevelt Room of the White House. Flanked by Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr., FDA Commissioner Dr. Marty Makary, and Dr. Mehmet Oz, Trump stood before the cameras and made a claim that sent shockwaves through the medical community, the stock market, and living rooms across America. He said repeatedly what the Tylenol is linked to autism. He told pregnant women not to take it. He said it roughly a dozen times during the press conference. The message was unmistakable. One of the most used over-the-counter medications in history was being presented as a risk to unborn children. The administration framed this as a bold, long-overdue confrontation with the pharmaceutical industry. They announced the FDA would begin the process of updating Tylenol's safety label. They promoted a separate compound called leucovorin as a potential autism treatment. They pointed to rising autism rates, noting that diagnoses had climbed from roughly 1 in every 150 children in the year 2000 to approximately 1 in every 31 children by 2022. The framing was powerful, the emotional weight was enormous, and the imagery of concerned parents, unanswered questions, and a government finally taking action was designed to resonate. But within the same news cycle, something remarkable happened. Convui, the company that owns the Tylenol brand, a firm that spun off from Johnson & Johnson just 2 years earlier in 2023, issued a statement that did not hedge, did not soften, and did not defer to the presidency. It said, in direct and unambiguous language, that it believes independent, sound science clearly shows that taking acetaminophen does not cause autism. The company said it strongly disagrees with any suggestion otherwise. It expressed deep concern about the health risk this misinformation poses to expecting mothers. And in a particularly pointed move, Kenvue warned that if pregnant women avoid Tylenol when they genuinely need it, they face a dangerous choice between suffering through high fevers, untreated, or turning to riskier alternative painkillers. That is not a passive statement. That is a publicly traded American company calling out a claim made by the President of the United States as not just incorrect, but potentially dangerous. Now let us step back and understand why this happened and why it matters far beyond the headline. The scientific picture on acetaminophen and autism is genuinely complicated, but complicated is very different from settled. The administration cited a meta-analysis published in August 2025, conducted by researchers from institutions including Mount Sinai, Harvard, UCLA, and UMass Lowell. That study examined 46 separate studies and found associations between prenatal acetaminophen exposure and certain neurodevelopmental outcomes, including autism and ADHD. On the surface, that sounds alarming, but here is the critical part that was missing from the press conference. The authors of that very study publicly stated that their work does not prove Tylenol causes autism. They did not recommend that pregnant patients stop using the medication. One of the study's own co-authors, a professor at Harvard School of Public Health, noted that acetaminophen remains an important tool for pregnant patients and their physicians. This is the difference between association and causation, a distinction that forms the entire foundation of medical science. Finding that two things sometimes occur together does not mean one causes the other. Decades of rigorous research, as Kenvue pointed out, have not established a causal link. The medical community broadly agrees. The Society for Maternal Fetal Medicine reaffirmed after the press conference that Tylenol remains an appropriate option for treating fever and pain during pregnancy. The president of the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists called the suggestion that Tylenol causes autism irresponsible, warning about the harmful and confusing message it sends to pregnant patients. So why did the administration make this claim in such forceful terms if the science does not support it? The answer requires understanding the broader political environment surrounding health policy in America right now. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who now leads the Department of Health and Human Services, has spent decades as an outspoken skeptic of pharmaceutical companies and mainstream medical consensus. His appointment represented a deliberate signal that the Trump administration intended to challenge orthodoxies in medicine. Autism has become a deeply emotional battleground, with millions of families desperate for answers and decades of research still unable to provide complete clarity on causes. In that environment, a presidential announcement promising bold action can carry enormous political appeal, regardless of whether the underlying science is solid. But here is where the story becomes something larger than one press conference. The moment Kenvue pushed back publicly, the market responded instantly. Shares of the company fell 7.5% in a single trading day. That decline erased approximately $2.6 billion in market value in hours. Think about what that means. An American company lost billions of dollars in shareholder value, not because of a product failure, not because of a lawsuit they lost, not because of a scandal they created, but because a government official made a claim they say is not supported by science. Families began to panic. Attorneys representing plaintiffs in lawsuits against Kenvue reported a surge of inbound calls from people wanting to join litigation against the company. Law firms that had seen their cases against Kenvue stalled in courts suddenly had new ammunition, even though the courts had previously found the scientific evidence insufficient. This is the compounding effect of a presidential claim. A president's words carry institutional weight that no other voice in the country can replicate. When the person holding that office says something from the White House podium, it moves markets, changes behavior, influences legal proceedings, and shapes the thinking of millions of people who trust their government. That power can be used to protect public health, or it can be misused, even if unintentionally, in ways that create confusion, financial damage, and genuine harm. Consider the people most directly affected by what was said that September afternoon. Pregnant women across America suddenly faced a terrifying question. Should I take the medication my doctor prescribed for my fever? The answer from virtually every mainstream medical body is yes. An untreated high fever during pregnancy carries its own documented risks to fetal development. But the President of the United States had just told them more than a dozen times in one press conference that taking Tylenol is not good. For many women, especially those without easy access to medical consultations, that presidential statement becomes their primary reference point. Choosing between fear of a medication and fear of an untreated fever is not a choice any pregnant woman should be forced to make based on unverified claims delivered from a political platform. The families of autistic children face a different kind of harm. For many of them, years of searching for answers has left deep wounds. When they hear a government announcement suggesting a cause has been identified, hope surges. And when that announcement is later challenged by scientists, dismissed by medical associations, and disputed by the company implicated, that hope collapses. The cycle of raised and shattered hope is its own form of cruelty, even when it is unintentional. Then there is Kenvue itself. The company is now navigating an extraordinary situation. A billion-dollar brand trusted by generations of Americans has been publicly named by a sitting president as a danger, despite no legal finding, no regulatory ruling, and no scientific consensus establishing it as one. Kenvue's decision to fight back directly, rather than offering diplomatic hedging, was a notable choice. In an era when many American corporations have been notably cautious about openly contradicting the White House, Kenvue's response was unusually direct. Whether that reflects confidence in their scientific position, calculation about long-term brand trust, or both, it sets an interesting precedent for how American companies might respond when government claims conflict with their interests and the evidence. Looking forward, several developments are now in motion that will shape how this story ends. The FDA has begun the process of updating acetaminophen's safety label to reflect potential risks during pregnancy, though the agency itself acknowledged that evidence is conflicting and that there can be risks from untreated fever as well. That label change, if finalized, would have real consequences. Doctors would be required to counsel patients differently, and the legal landscape for Kenvue would shift considerably. The lawsuits that were previously stalled are now energized. Attorneys are preparing new legal arguments using the administration's own statements as evidence. Congress will likely examine whether the FDA's process was driven by science or by political pressure. And the broader medical community is now in an increasingly difficult position, trying to give patients clear guidance in an environment where official government statements contradict scientific consensus. There is also a deeper question that this moment raises, one that will outlast this specific story. We are living in an era where public health guidance has become deeply politicized. The COVID pandemic exposed the fractures. The debates over vaccines accelerated them. And now we are watching a scenario where the maker of one of the most studied medications in history is publicly disagreeing with the federal government about basic scientific facts. When companies are in a stronger position to defend scientific consensus than elected officials are to uphold it, something fundamental has shifted in how Americans navigate truth. A president's words should carry the weight of evidence. A press conference podium should be a place where the science is clear before the announcement is made, because once millions of people hear something from that podium, the damage to public understanding, to corporate value, to individual health decisions cannot simply be walked back with a clarification the next morning. The real question this moment leaves us with is not whether Tylenol causes autism. The science, for all its complexity, does not currently support that conclusion. The real question is this: in an age when power and science increasingly collide in public, who do you trust? And what happens to the rest of us when that question no longer has an obvious answer?